Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this local review body for the 18th of December 2023, the last one of the year, and the last one certainly before Christmas. Before we go further into the meeting, let me do some introductions. I am Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the local review body, and I have with me this morning two other councillors. To my right, Councillor Grant Stewart, to my left, Councillor David Inworth. We are all members of the planning committee, as we have to be to sit on this body. To my right, far right, is Mr. Ross Burton. Mr. Burton has had no previous involvement with any of the applications. He's an independent consultant purely for this review body. To my left, beside Councillor Inworth, is Mr. Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor for the LRB this morning. And beyond him is Jessica Guild, who is our committee services officer. So my first question this morning to my two colleagues is, do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Illingworth.
None.
And Councillor Stewart?
No.
Thank you. Next point on the agenda is to do the minutes. The minutes of the last meeting, I'm happy to approve. None of you were on the meeting, only myself as convener, and I'm happy to approve those minutes, and they are so approved. So with that, we can now move on to the first case this morning. This is number 4.1, and this is the siting of 3 accommodation units and a laundry storage unit for use as short-term letting or workers' accommodation and associated works in retrospect. And this is 170 metres northeast, Keeper's Cottage, Amelry, near Dunkeld. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. Could I have the first slide, please? You see the site at the top of the aerial photograph there. You see the A822 at the bottom of the slide, and the farm that has to be passed through to get to the units. Next slide, please. So this is the entrance to the road leading up to the units from the farm. Next slide, please. And looking back down from that gate to the farm buildings, you can see there's a significant a rise in difference in land levels. You rise to the application site. Next slide, please. And that's the road leading up to the units that are just round the corner at the top of that slight rise you see before the woods. Next slide, please. And the units themselves, so you can see 3 caravans, and the blue structure to the left-hand side there is the welfare unit. Next slide, please. Looking back down towards the road, you can see as the land falls away, there are trees, there's forestry intervening between the site and the main road and the farm. Next slide, please. Close up of the units, that's one of them. Next slide, please. And 2, and next slide, please. And 3. So 3 units arranged on the site. Next slide, please. And that's the welfare unit, which has washing and drying facilities inside it. Next slide, please. And that's the view just straight from the front, the parking area in front of the caravans. So that gives you an idea of the setting of the units. Next slide, please. Right. So, retrospective planning permission is sought for the siting of 3 residential caravans and a metal container that houses a laundry washroom on land to the north of a group of cottages and a farm near Amelry. The structures have been on site for 4 or 5 years and are generally let to seasonal workers, although they have been let to tourists. The Council's refusal of planning permission means that the caravans can remain on site, as the General Permitted Development Order allows the siting of structures like these for the use of seasonal workers. The welfare unit, a metal container containing a washing machine and tumble dryer, does not benefit from the same permitted development rights, nor does the occupation of the caravans by anyone other than seasonal workers. The caravans are each 10 metres long, 3.6 metres wide, and the container is 6 metres long. To summarise the applicant's case, the handling report confirms that the caravans enjoy permitted development rights. The only issues are the container and the occasional use of the caravans by tourists. The caravans and container are accommodated within the landscape and don't result in suburbanisation or give rise to impacts on amenity, and don't give rise to issues of traffic, parking or flood risk. The applicant proposes planting 28 trees in an area to the north of the caravans and 28 trees in an area to the southeast. A mixture of pine trees 3 feet high and birch trees 10 feet high is proposed, enhancing the setting of the structures and maintaining and enhancing the local landscape quality. The welfare unit, the metal container, is required to cater for the needs of the seasonal workers in the caravans. It would be possible to paint it an agreed colour. The unit complies with Policy 23A Health and Safety and 29AI of NPF 4. The proposed use of the caravans by tourists would be in accordance with Policy 8 of the Local Development Plan, which supports the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in rural areas. The use could be accommodated within the site without eroding local landscape quality and complies with Policy 29 of the Local Development Plan, Rural Development, which supports the diversification of existing businesses, which the proposal does without the need for further development. To summarise the handling report, Local Development Plan 2, Policies 8, Rural Business Diversification, and Policy 9, Caravan Sites, Chalets and Timeshare Developments are both relevant. Policy 8 is directly applicable. The proposal is for a new site, and the submission is required to seek to demonstrate why this specific site has been chosen for the development, to identify a specific site resource or opportunity, and to confirm that the proposal meets a new market or extends the tourism season. This site appears to lack any site-specific resource. The provision of additional tourist accommodation, even if it can be justified as a need in the area, does not give this piece of land a site-specific resource required by policy. The submission is not supported by a business plan as required by policy. Perth and Kinross Council generally seeks to support business and tourism-related development, but this requires to be located in the correct places and justified in accordance with policy. The land offers no site-specific resource and is not dissimilar to many other rural plots throughout Perth and Kinross. In addition, given the design of the units and the exposed rural location, it is considered that the principle of development would not comply with policy. The siting and design of this development on an exposed and undefined rural site would not contribute positively to the surrounding natural environment and is therefore contrary to Policy 1, Placemaking, and supplementary guidance and Policy 14, Design, Quality and Place of National Planning Framework 4. There were no representations to the site, to the application. Material considerations, Policies 23 and 29 of National Planning Framework 4 and Policies 8 and 9 of the Local Development Plan are relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The General Permitted Development Order does allow the use of land for a caravan park in specific circumstances. In this case, the occupation of the caravans by agricultural or forestry workers. The GPDO states that, and I'm quoting here, the permitted development right is granted subject to the condition that the use shall be discontinued when the circumstances which grant these rights cease to exist, and that when they do cease to exist, all caravans on the site are to be removed as soon as reasonably practicable. It's clear, therefore, that the use of caravans for anyone other than agricultural or forestry workers is not permitted under this permitted development. The committee therefore needs to consider this as an application for the 3 caravans to be occupied by tourists and to set aside the fact that they are in place and have been used for 4 or 5 years by seasonal workers. The committee also needs to consider whether the metal container that's on site is acceptable in its own right. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Stewart, any questions?
No, I'm happy with the papers submitted and Mr. Ross's submission.
Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. Do we know how long the caravans have been used for short-term lets?
Apparently they have been used in the past, but I don't think it's not in that information isn't in the papers, Councillor.
And the other question is, do we know if these caravans are visible from the A822?
I don't think so. I wasn't looking at it specifically for them when I was on the road leading to it, but I think given the topography and the actual site itself, which is the top of a rise on a kind of plateau, and there are trees between the farm and the actual buildings, probably means that they're not visible from that main road.
If the caravans have been used for short-term lets for more than 10 years, would that be a planning consideration?
If the use has been in place for more than 10 years, then the applicants can apply for what's called a certificate of lawfulness for the use, and they would then have to provide evidence that the caravans have been in continuous use for that time. The land had been used for that purpose continuously for that time. And then if they were able to furnish that evidence, then the council would have no option but to grant a certificate of lawfulness.
I come in, but to directly answer your question, no, it's not really so relevant because you don't have a certificate. You've got a planning application before you. If there was a certificate of lawfulness in place, this wouldn't be before you. They wouldn't need to come for the planning permission. So you're assessing as it is the planning application for both the workers' units and, of course, the short-term letting. There is a change of use. So to straight answer your questions, no, it's not really relevant.
Thank you.
Mr. Burton, just one question myself, and that's I presume the attractiveness of the place would be its isolation. That's what people, I won't use the term off grid, but it's that sort of thing which might be attractive to people.
It certainly is isolated, and you saw from the final photograph the view from the front of the caravans. You don't see much there other than countryside and hills. So yes, I guess that would be the attraction for people wanting to use it for tourism.
So members, given no further questions, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
I would like to proceed.
Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
I'm going to be a little bit different because I feel the reason here is to defer for more information. So, members, I presume I need to explain what my thoughts are and see how you feel. I think I can see there's an attraction to this place because of the isolation and the way people want to go. But we are in a problem here because we do not have a concise business plan, which Policy 8 does require. And I feel, given there's a possibility that it is an attractive proposition, a business plan would be ideal, a concise business plan. And I'm also of a mind that because it uses seasonal workers as well as tourists, we would need to see a comprehensive breakdown of the times, how much time is spent for seasonal workers, how much they believe will be used for tourists. So that is my thought. And one of you would like to come in on that.
I would be happy to defer on that basis.
Councillor Stewart.
On reflection, I'd be happy to defer to have a look at a business plan and see if that relates to some of the reasons for the refusal.
Okay, Mr. Elliott, then it looks like we're happy to defer on the basis that we need a comprehensive business plan as per requirement in Policy 8. And I feel that given that seasonal workers will probably work in the summer months, we need to have a guide of how that breaks down with tourists for the short-term let and for seasonal workers. Because obviously, I would say the place loses the attraction in wintertime. It's very barren up there. So I'm not convinced that there's a requirement, but a business plan will explain that to us. And that's a majority, a unanimous view of Mr. Elliott.
Just bear with me, I'm writing this down. for a HAB convener unanimously is defer for the applicant to produce a comprehensive business plan for the proposal, including information on the, I've got months of operation for use as both short-term lets and seasonal workers, so splitting the two up. And of course, then giving development management an opportunity to comment on that business plan before it then comes back to the local review body in the future. Okay. Yes.
Right, members, we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is now number 4.2. This is relating to the erection of a dwelling house and associated works land north of 31 Main Street, Kelty Bridge. And again, Mr. Burton, if you could kindly introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures. Could you have a first slide, please? Now, the site is outlined in red. You can see it's pretty much central to the aerial shot there, and you can see it's surrounded on well, it's adjacent to countryside. The two houses immediately to the south of the application site were recently developed, and they were originally part of the same land ownership as the application site. Next slide, please. So, looking at the site from the opposite side of the road, you can see the buildings on the left-hand side. The site is directly in front of these buildings on that side. Next slide, please. This is a small local pocket park, I suppose you'd call it, which the site is beyond that. You can see there's terrace fencing erected. So the site is between the gable wall of the house, you can see, which is one of the more recently built houses, and the wall. Next slide, please. Looking at it from the road, this would be the access to the site, and you can see the fence beyond, which is the full extent of the site going back, and you can see it's a field beyond that. Next slide, please. And looking at it, you can see it's fairly green. It's been left to just to grow, if you like, since these houses were built. Next slide, please. And looking into the site, the other direction. So this is the road is on the left in this picture. So you can see the site extends to roughly the line of trees that you can see on the right hand side, and you can see a hedge which defines the site. Next slide, please. The site falls away quite steeply. It's not that easy to see in this picture, but you can see, I think, the difference in levels to the lower part of the site from the upper part of the site, which is at road level. Next slide, please. And this is within the site. You can see it's actually quite steep in parts. Next slide, please. I've included this, which isn't a photograph, obviously. This is to just for clarification for the committee. The settlement boundary of Kelty Bridge is the thick black line, and you can see that the two houses that were recently developed and the application site are both out with the settlement boundary. I've marked the application site again in red on the map there. I think that's it. So back to yeah, thank you. So planning permission is sought for the erection of a detached house on land immediately to the north of a detached house on the edge of Kelty Bridge. The proposed house is two-storey, but uses the difference in levels within the site to present as a single-storey house to the street. The ground floor would have a living, dining, kitchen area, study and bathroom, and there will be three bedrooms on the lower floor, 2 with ensuite bathrooms. It's proposed to be finished in stone with a clay pan-tile roof. 2 off-street parking places are proposed. The proposed house would necessitate the removal of 22 trees on site. It's proposed to plant 46 new trees in compensation. The appeal site is adjacent to a site where 2 new houses, granted in 2015 and again in 2020, have recently been built. The appeal site was proposed in the most recent application, the 2020 application, to be rewilded, as well as containing a septic tank to serve the new houses. In addition to the successful application for these 2 new houses, an application was submitted in 2023 for a detached house larger than that proposed here on the application site, on the appeal site, but that application was withdrawn before it could be determined. To summarise the applicant's case, the application site is brownfield land and reads as part of the village rather than the surrounding farmland. The development would not have any significant detrimental impact on the character or appearance of the village. It would not have a detrimental impact on the character, appearance or setting of the nearby C-listed buildings. The fact that the two new adjacent houses are out with the settlement boundary shows that the boundary in the local development plan is out of date and should include the two new houses and the appeal site. The proposal could be implemented without any loss of trees, which would help to satisfy the concerns and recommendations of the Council's Biodiversity and Tree Officer and could be secured by a condition on a consent. The design of the proposed house is not, contrary to the view of the Case Officer, poor. The design and materials are intended to blend in with the traditional house types which characterise the village. To summarise the handling report, this is a distinctive green site on the east side of the village which establishes the transition from the village to open countryside. Its loss will have a detrimental impact on the rural character and visual amenity of the village. While the finishing materials proposed acknowledge the finish of the new cottages to the south, the mass form and design of the L-shaped split-level house is poor, incongruous, and not in keeping with the traditional styled cottages and the surrounding historic village. The application site is not in, but adjoins the settlement boundary and forms a distinctive boundary between the residential area of the village of Keltybridge and open farmland beyond it. Policy 6, Settlement Boundaries of the Local Development Plan, states that development on sites that adjoin settlement boundaries will only be permitted where the proposal is either in accordance with Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, and does not adjoin a principal settlement boundary, justifiable on the basis of a specific operational and locational need, or required to address a shortfall in housing land supply in line with Policy 24, maintaining an effective housing land supply, and where it will not result in adverse effects, either individually or in combination, on the integrity of a European designated site. The proposed site does not meet these criteria, and consequently it's also contrary to National Planning Framework 4, Policy 16, Quality Homes. The development requires the removal of 22 trees, and the Biodiversity Officer highlights that a biodiversity enhancement report has been submitted, but without a baseline survey of the site. There are records of red squirrels within 150 metres of the site, and this should have ensured that an ecological survey was submitted. In addition, mature trees in poorer condition may contain bat roosts. The removal of 22 trees is not sustainable. There is evidence that the site has and is naturalising and is therefore of biodiversity value, so the proposal does not satisfy Policy 9 of National Planning Framework 4, brownfield, vacant and derelict land and empty buildings. The two new dwelling houses to the south of the site were approved partly on the basis that the application site would be retained as a green buffer to mitigate the visual impact of the new dwelling houses, and would be enhanced by further planting to provide an attractive green edge to the settlement on the east side of Main Street as it transitions into open farmland. The proposed development does not respect the village setting, and the further erosion of green use on the site will have a detrimental impact on the character of the village and on visual amenity. The site is to the east of a terrace of Category C listed cottages. While there's no direct impact on the listed buildings, the proposed new dwelling house will appear prominent in their immediate setting and viewed from the north, so will have a detrimental effect on the setting of the listed buildings. So the proposal does not satisfy National Planning Framework 4, Policy 7, Historic Assets and Places, and Local Development Plan 2, Policy 27A, Listed Buildings. 22 trees are proposed to be removed. An indicative compensatory planting plan shows approximately 20 new trees on the east boundary of the site and 26 trees off-site to the west. The exact details of the off-site provision are unknown. Specific detail was requested during the application process, but no response was received. Off-site provision is not acceptable, and the planning agent was advised of this. The Biodiversity Officer's response highlights the trees are of biodiversity benefit and that the number of replacement trees is not in accordance with guidance. Further, no ecological survey of the site or assessment of the likely effects of the development on habitats and species were submitted. There are records of red squirrel, a protected species within 150 metres of the site, and mature trees may contain bat roosts. Representations. 10 objections were received, including one from Cleash and Blair Adam Community Council. The grounds were loss of green space, detrimental impact on local viewpoint, adverse effect on visual amenity, contrary to development plan policy, over-intensive development, inappropriate land use, road safety and traffic congestion, overlooking loss of privacy and impact on residential amenity, and poor design not in keeping with the character of the local area. Material considerations. National Planning Framework 4, Policies 3, 6, 9, 14, 16 and 17, Local Development Plan Policies 1, 6, 7, 40B, 41 and 42 are all relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The 2 houses which were granted under the previous Local Development Plan are relevant to the consideration of this application in 2 ways. In relation to the settlement boundary, which excludes them, and the appeal site, and also to the original intention to use the appeal site as a means of softening the boundary to the site of the 2 new houses and the village. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Illingworth, have you any questions?
Thank you. Are there any concerns about coal mines beneath the site?
None that I'm aware of, Councillor. This would normally be taken account of at the application stage, and normally if there are if there's a record of coal mining in the area, then the council can ask for a coal mining report. And I'm being told that there is information in the papers. I could defer to my colleague.
Sorry, Mr. Burton, just for recalling, certainly from my notes, and I think it's in the papers. In fact, I found it page 123. There's a coal mining report. So originally there were concerns from the coal authority, but a report's been produced and they no longer object to it. So it's been their concerns have been satisfied.
Apologies, Councillor. I remember picking that up at the time, but it slipped my mind.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, any question?
Mr. Ross, I was wondering if I could ask a question about the brownfield. So my understanding, there's no building being replaced on this site, and maybe you could expand a wee bit about the terminology brownfield.
I couldn't see any remains of any buildings on site when I was there, Councillor. Brownfield land, the brownfield land policy and the local development plan requires not only that a site was previously developed, but that it would benefit from the redevelopment to the extent that it would redevelopment would be a way, or possibly the only way, of dealing with any contamination on site. Now, I'm not aware of any contamination on site to fulfil that part of the policy.
Thank you for that explanation. No further questions.
Thank you. You actually asked my question, so that's another question gone. Members, then, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart?
I'm happy to proceed, Chair.
And Councillor Illingworth?
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Stewart, if you could kick off on this one for us.
Yes, this was quite a complex set of papers, and previous planning applications and previous things. I am minded to refuse this application. My reasons are cited in our papers from officers, PKC officers. Reason 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5.
Thank you, Councillor. If I may come in now, it is a complex case with a lot of background information to be read. But in my mind, the core of this is simple, that when the 2 other houses were built, there was a condition on there that this land would be left as a green buffer. At the moment, the foundations went in, the building started, that condition was accepted, and that condition should therefore stand. And therefore, I too am going to have to refuse the application. This is meant to be a green buffer. That was what the condition was. That was what was accepted when those two houses were built, and there's no reason for that to be changed. So I think overall, I would go with the reasons for refusal the officer has said in his decision notice, and I'm happy with that. There might be a couple of amendments, just minor things, Mr. Elliott, but we can come back to that and just let Councillor Elliott have his. Sorry, Councillor Illingworth have his say.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow councillors that this appeal should be refused, and for the reasons they mention.
So, Mr. Elliott, I'll get it right this time. We have a unanimous decision to refuse. It's just a couple of points I mentioned in refusal 1. It says policy 1 of placemaking should be policy 1A, and I think policy 1B/C should apply as well. I think that was the only thing I could think of that needs amending. And I think on reason for refusal 5, I also picked up, it mentions again policy 1, should be policy 1A of LDB2. Apart from that, I think that's what was said. It's fine.
Yes, thank you, Convener. What I've got on this particular matter is a unanimous refusal, and Convener, you're suggesting a slight tidying up in terms of ground refusal 1, policy 1 becomes 1A and 1BC, which is obviously the subdivision within 1B in policy, and on ground refusal 5, you're proposing that policy 1 becomes 1A, so you're narrowing it down again, and I'm assuming both other members agree with that. Yes. Okay, thank you.
And thank you very much. I'm not sure who was who in there, but I'm sorry it's been refused anyway. So we'll now move on to item 4.3, which relates to the erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 75 metres northwest of Mulmac, Sorka in Kinross. Kinrossie, I think that should be, shouldn't it? It's got Kinross there, so Kinrossie. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures. First slide. You can see the application site bounded in red. Sorka, the houses in Sorka are accessed off an unadopted road that you can see running along the front of the houses, and the application site you can see is in the corner. Now, the red line shows the application site as proposed with the access road, which is the difference between this site and the house that has consent, which I'll cover later on. So the proposed location of the house is in the corner of the site, adjacent to the 2 rows of houses that it would adjoin. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the site at the corner of the unadopted road. You can see the fence line of the adjoining house runs right up to the corner, and there's a driveway into that house on the corner, and then the fence of the next house to the right runs down in front of that house. Next slide, please. And that's a bit closer to the actual corner of the site. So the site would be just beyond the fence that you can see there. Next slide, please. And again, closer, so you can see there's land beyond the fence, which is the application site. Next slide, please. And looking from that fence, the fence line you can see there is the extent of the site. So it extends as far as the trees you can see in the distance, and not all the way across to the hedge, but about halfway across that field. Next slide, please. And looking at the site from a slightly different angle, you can see the extent of the site to the far trees. Again, the road that's proposed would run up to the right hand side of the hedge that you can just see the edge of on the right hand side of the photo. Next slide, please. And that's looking back along the unadopted road towards the houses along the main frontage, I suppose, of Sorka. Next slide, please. And this is the access road which would be used. At the moment, it's a farm track leading to the field. So the new driveway is on the right-hand side of the picture. On the left-hand side of the picture is the unadopted road leading up towards the rest of the houses in Socher. Next slide, please. Looking at the farm track, you can see trees beyond. Just beyond the edge of that hedge that you can see on the left-hand side is where the new road would start. Next slide, please. So that's looking back down the access road, the farm track, from where the road would enter the application site. Next slide, please. And then looking towards the application site, the new driveway would be just on the right-hand side of the hedges you can see on the left of the picture there, which are the actual rear gardens of the houses in Socher. And you can see the extent of the site, the trees at the very end. That's the full extent of the site. Next slide, please. So planning permission as principle is sought for the erection of a detached house on a corner site on the edge of Socher, a small settlement which has 14 dwellings. The house will be located on the northwest corner of the settlement, which has a mix of detached, semi-detached and terraced houses. As the application is for permission in principle, new details of the house design or internal layout have been submitted, but an indicative site plan shows the potential location which is in line with the houses to the west and south, respecting the building lines of both. It's proposed to improve an existing farm track which runs to the rear of the houses to the south of the site for access. Following refusal of this application, a new application was submitted for the same development, but utilising an access taken directly from the unadopted road which serves the rest of the houses in Socher, so reducing the size of the application site to the site of the house and garden. That application was approved on the 11th of October 2023. I would just point out to members that the copy of the application submitted by the agent on pages 302 to 308 of your papers is incorrect. It's actually a copy of an application for a short-term let in Perth. The correct application can be viewed on the case file. To summarise the applicant's case, the applications followed pre-application discussions with the council over a proposed development of 4 detached houses using the whole field. Following this, a single house plot was designed and submitted. The principle of rounding off the existing building group by the addition of a single house has been approved under a previous application. This application seeks to amend the access to the house by utilising and upgrading a farm track that runs behind the houses to the south, thereby improving their amenity by reducing vehicle movements along the unadopted road that serves them. Hedgerow planting, including 2 oak trees, is proposed to the east of the new access to separate it from the rest of the field and to improve the setting of the settlement generally. The proposed new access would consolidate and improve the setting of the building group with the provision of green and blue infrastructure along the northeast boundary. To summarise the handling report, the proposed dwelling is located within the existing building group, and the indicative layout which has been provided demonstrates the scope for the dwelling to relate successfully to the character, layout and building pattern of the group. However, the proposed access, which is 70 metres long on the edge of and out with the well-nucleated building group, fails to respect the existing layout and building pattern. The placement policies of Local Development Plan 2 state that accesses should reinforce the street scene and open space. The proposed access fails to do this. The existing hamlet is considered to be well nucleated and is served by an access which contributes to its character and building pattern. The introduction of a new access of the length proposed would alter the established character of the group and fails to relate to the building pattern, contrary to the requirements of the Housing and the Countryside Supplementary Guidance. The position of the proposed new access would result in 2 existing houses being sandwiched between accesses to the front and rear, which is considered to detrimentally impact on their residential amenity, as it would result in vehicular traffic passing to the front and rear, resulting in potential noise and light pollution. Representations. 9 representations have been received. Some of the points raised relate to the principle of development of the new dwelling, but the points which are relevant to the proposed access are impact on farming operations and access, inappropriate land use, light pollution, loss of open space, loss of sunlight or daylight, loss of trees, noise pollution, out of character, impact of new access road on amenity, noise from construction operations, ecological impact, impact on character and density of the area, maintenance of the private road, road safety, flood risk, loss of prime agricultural land, and contrary to the development plan. Policy 17 of National Planning Framework 4, New Homes in Rural Areas, is relevant, as is Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside of the Local Development Plan, and the supplementary guidance which supports this policy. Some observations. The proposed house already has planning permission in principle, albeit with a different access. Whether the access which is part of the permitted development is achievable is not a material matter for this committee, which has to decide whether the development as a whole, the house and proposed access, which would be within the field to the northeast of the hamlet, is acceptable in terms of national and council policy. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Ingworth?
I have no questions.
Councillor Stewart?
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering, the sort of eastern boundary line, if rather than the western, has the perimeter moved from the actual granted housing development, or is it just purely that's an extension of, basically have we moved east to accommodate the track?
Yes, the whole boundary has moved to accommodate the track. The existing planning consent, the red line of that is extends a line from the rear of the two houses immediately to the south of the site. So there's a band which is the width of the access road and swale and planting, which extends for the whole of the application site into the field.
Thank you. That clarifies that, because I am aware that it was granted because it was sort of deemed as filling in that corner area. So we're actually moving east.
Yeah, well, that is the acceptability of that is the decision the committee has to take today, Councillor. Yes, you're correct.
Right, thank you. No further questions.
I have no questions on this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth?
I'm happy to proceed.
And Councillor Stewart?
I'd like to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. And I got my order wrong last time, so Councillor Illingworth, if you could start this time.
Okay, thank you, convener. I'd like to propose that we grant this permission. I think the issues are around a relatively small piece of land needed for a road in. So I'm happy to proceed with that.
And Councillor Stewart?
I'm minded to refuse permission. And reading the officer's reasons for refusal, I would concur with them in reasons 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you, Councillor. Like yourself and Councillor Illingworth, we were on the panel which saw this case come up a couple of months ago. As far as I can see, this is effectively greenbelt land, which is prime agricultural. Obviously, the house will take some of that away, but the track will take even more. And I would agree with the officer's concerns that it will sandwich the other two houses in. Given that we've already got an application in place, and I have a letter here which says that this can be capable of implementation, I can't see a reason to overturn the refusal. So, and it does seem to be the same track as was before. So, I'm of a mind to refuse the appeal in this case and stick with the reason for refusal by the officer, given that there is an alternative route in place and the building can effectively go ahead. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a majority decision on this case.
Thank you, Convener. What I have, members, is by 2-1 majorities to refuse the application per the original reasons for refusal, with Councillor Illingworth dissenting on the basis that I understand that Councillor Illingworth thought that it wouldn't be a significant change from the development plan. Okay.
Thank you. So members, we now move on to number 4.4, which is to do with the installation of replacement windows and door at Melville Terrace, Cowgate, South Bank in Errol. Mr. Burton, again for you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs. So you see the application site bounded in red on the South Bank, close to the southern edge of Errol. It's part of two semi-detached houses. Next slide, please. So the application house is on the left of the two houses you can see on the screen. You can see that the upper floor windows have been replaced previously, and they have the look of UPVC windows. The downstairs windows have not, and you can see that the house adjacent retains its sash and case windows. Next slide, please. And that's the houses just immediately to the left of the application property. Next slide, please. And to the right, looking along the street, you can see the next door house and other houses on the other side of the street. Next slide, please. Looking at these houses, you can see a mixture of different types of windows. Next slide, please. That's another view of the houses on that side of the street to give some context. Next slide, please. As looking at houses just immediately, the house you can see on the right-hand side of the picture is the application house. So these are the houses closest to it. Next slide, please. And looking along the street, you can see the house in context. The application's house is in the centre of this picture. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for the replacement of the ground floor windows and front door of a two-storey semi-detached house in South Bank, Errol. The upstairs windows have already been replaced with UPVC windows. The windows proposed for replacement are a 3-window bay to the left of the front door and a single window to the right. They are all currently timber framed with sash and case opening. The front door is timber, painted black, with a 6-pane glass upper half and clear glass fanlight window above. The replacement windows proposed for the bay are UPVC and are designed to replicate as closely as possible the appearance of the existing windows, including the addition of an astral glazing bar halfway down the lower pane, which should be placed on the outside of the glass. The central window in the bay will not open, and the upper panels of the side windows will open outwards from the top of the window frame. The window to the side of the front door will open by a traditional sash and case method. The front door is proposed as a single glazed panel with UPVC surround. The clear fanlight is proposed to be replaced with a clear glazed panel in a UPVC frame. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicants could not afford to replace all the windows in the house when they had the upstairs windows replaced in 2003, before Errol was designated a conservation area in 2004, and they now found that the downstairs windows and door are in a condition where repair is no longer viable and replacement is the only option. Following government guidance, the applicants seek to improve their home energy efficiency. The alternatives of using more power to heat their home or wearing extra layers of clothing are not appealing. The intention is to invest in improving the property's energy performance certificate. When getting quotes for the replacement windows, they stress that they should look as close as possible to the originals from the road. In addition to the energy efficiency improvements the new windows would bring, the security of the house would be also greatly improved. Approximately 80% plus of homes in Errol, from the applicant's own observations, have UPVC windows. To summarise the handling report, for replacement windows in conservation areas, the Council's placemaking supplementary guidance advises that replacement windows on the front and sides of the building visible to the public should match the original as closely as possible and should replicate the original in every respect. They should be fitted in the same plane, be made up of timber sections matching the originals, and should have meeting rails in the same position as the originals. The two side windows in the bay are to be replaced with top-opening UPVC windows, which fails to replicate the sash and case opening method of the existing windows. The central window is to be replaced with a non-opening UPVC window, which again fails to replicate the existing sash and case window. The central window's upper astragal is 69 millimeters in height, while the sides are 115 millimeters. This detracts from the appearance of the windows. The meeting rail of the window to the side of the door would be 230 millimeters higher than the meeting rail of the existing window. As well as failing to replicate the existing window, the new window would clash with the appearance of the ground floor windows on the adjoining house. The proposed window would also have horns, which are not a feature of the existing window or of the windows on the adjoining house. For replacement doors in conservation areas, the placemaking supplementary guidance advises that replacing them using a different style or material can have a negative effect on the appearance of the building. The guide seeks to ensure that replacement doors in the front of the building match the originals as closely as possible. It's proposed to replace the traditional timber front door with a modern style, fully glazed UPVC frame door with a fanlight. In terms of design and materials, the proposed door does not match the existing door. Due to the non-traditional design, the UPVC frames and the extensive use of glazing, the proposed windows and door are considered to be detrimental to the traditional character of the house and the character and appearance of Errol Conservation Area, contrary to policies 7D and 16G1 of NPF4 and policies 1A, 1B and 28A of the Local Development Plan. There were no representations received. Material considerations are, as stated, National Planning Framework 4 policies 7D and 16G1 and Local Development policies 1A, 1B and 28A are relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The upstairs windows of the house have been replaced with UPVC windows, but as that happened before Errol was designated a conservation area, it has limited relevance to this application in policy terms. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. I may kick off on this. When it comes to obviously the applicant wants to keep the windows as identical to the existing ones as possible. Can we condition that at all in some way that they are alike, or can we ask to see the final design first to ensure that it's like for like?
I would suggest that it's difficult to impose conditions which redesign all the windows, Councillor. You're effectively redesigning an application by condition, which I would say would be likely to be unsuccessful if the same materials were proposed, UPVC, because the frames are always going to be, or the frames that generally are thicker in UPVC than they are in timber. The advice I would give as a planner would be that would be difficult, and it would be actually a bit tidier to refuse and then suggest the applicant comes back with windows that match the original more closely. They come back with a fresh application, sorry, for windows.
So your thoughts would be to come back with wooden frame?
I think it would be extremely difficult to redesign the windows successfully by condition.
So my thoughts are, what I've seen in the drawings is when the windows are closed, fully closed, they're as close to the original as possible. And I'm thinking, because energy efficiency is the thing behind my thinking, but when they're closed, they are almost the same as I can see.
The windows within the bay would be similar, certainly. They would have the glazing bar, the lower glazing bar attached to the outside of the window. The frames would be slightly thicker than they are at the moment, but in other respects they would be similar. But as you say, that's when they're closed. Yeah. I would add that the window to the right of the door would be less than similar because the glazing bar is higher than in the existing window, and the difference is enough to be noticed.
The house next door, from what I could see, and on the photographs, looks like it has secondary double glazing in place, which I think is usually as efficient, isn't it?
Can we go to the second slide, please? I think we should be able to see it from that, or third slide. Yeah. It's hard to tell from that photograph, Councillor, whether it's secondary glazing or internal shutters, which some people have. Certainly secondary glazing behind timber windows is an effective way of improving insulation and retaining the appearance of windows from the street. Yes.
And two other things really. Generally, is double glazing reasonably efficient compared to secondary glazing efficient as double glazing? Would you say? Generally, I know it's going to put you on the spot, but generally, would you think?
I'm so far from being an expert on that. I wouldn't care to comment, Councillor.
And the other question was, could we condition the colour of the UVP so that it's white? I mean, that could be done, I presume.
That could be conditioned, yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Councillor Stewart, any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Rossum, my understanding that the upstairs windows were replaced prior to the conservation, so I imagine people can retain these until they become obsolete, and then they'll have to apply for planning permission to replace the replacement windows.
That's correct, Councillor, yes.
There was reference made to in the papers, and you alluded to it yourself, about original doors. Are we talking about the door that is there now, or when the original door the property was built with?
That's by original door, I meant the door that's on the property at the moment.
And the application in front of us, when you talk about replacement of an original door, it would be a door of that style, if it was, if that makes sense.
No, I think I see where you're coming from, Councillor. Yes, the replacement of the door that's there just now, which is half timbered with six panes, a 6-pane glazing element above that, is more traditional in appearance than the proposed door, which is single pane with a UPVC surround. Yes.
Sorry, I'm being a bit probably obtuse at times, but it's important because this is the crux of the application. Is we're dealing with we're in a conservation sort of area and a pretty unique streetscape. But I noticed that the house next door has a different type of door, and when we're talking about replacing windows to similar to next door, and when you look further down the street, there's other 9-pane windows that look in keeping with the kind of the time of the establishment of these homes. So are we looking at the likeness of the property, particularly this Melville Terrace? Are we focusing on replacing that door, or the other house doesn't really come into it and they've got a different style of door?
Right. The door that's on the application property might well not be the original door that was on it when it was built. It has, because it's timber and is half paned and half, the upper part is 6-pane, it has a more traditional appearance. The door on the house to the side looks as if it has been replaced more recently than the door on the application property, but I would imagine it was replaced before Errol was a conservation area. So, no permission would be required for that. But now that it is a conservation area, this is an item, this is something that we have to take, the council has to take account of, looking at what is the traditional style of door and how it relates to the street scene, and then compared to that, how the proposed door would relate to the house itself and the street scene.
Thank you. That clarifies.
Councillor Stewart come in there, but looking at the placemaking policy, which is relevant to consideration, may not help you very much. But in terms of doors, which is on page 74 of the placemaking policy, it does refer to the building's character. It does say building, which to me focuses on the individual property, but it could be wider because it talks about the building's character. I know that's not directly answering your question, but at least it's in the policy.
Thank you for that clarification. I've no further questions, Chair.
Councillor Illingworth.
No questions, Gavina.
I just have one final question. I'm just looking at that photograph before us. The house to the left, the White House on the left, that looks like that's double glazed as well. I'm right beside it.
Yeah, I think if we go to the next slide, that one of the, yes, so that shows the house on to the left. It's hard to tell, Councillor. If they are double glazed, then they look to be timber sash encased to me. Not all houses in that street are that. Some are quite clearly not timber. But if these ones aren't timber, they're quite a good quality PVC, I have to say.
Okay, thanks very much. No further questions. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
I've got sufficient information. I'd like to proceed.
And Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed on this one. And I'll kick off on this one, as I may. This is a bit of a tricky one, to be honest, because we can understand the requirements of a conservation area. And at the same time, we're looking at the energy efficiency of houses, and we have in the background of our minds climate change, and obviously the cost of energy as well. I have to say up front that the style of the door, I would say, is unacceptable, and I would be looking to refuse any acceptance of that. So it comes down to the windows, and this is where it gets difficult. On balance, whilst I accept that UVPC is probably a slightly cheaper option, we are in a conservation area. I think, on balance, I'm going to have to refuse this application. I do it reluctantly because I know that the cost of electricity and energy is expensive, and I know double glazing will help. But I'm of the mind that wood timber framed windows are longer lasting, and they are more efficient in the long term. And also there's an option of secondary double glazing, which is a cheaper option and can work just as well, particularly in conservation areas where you don't want to damage the appearance of the property. So I'm going to have to refuse this, I think, on this occasion. I certainly would have refused the door. I think that was way out of character for the area. So on balance, I'm refusing. My suggestion to the applicants is they consider secondary double glazing. And if not that, then perhaps put an application back in using timber framed double glazing in replacement of UVPC. So Councillor Stewart, your thoughts?
Thank you, Chair. Yep. Yes, I'd like to echo some of your comments that in this time of high fuel costs and people living in older properties trying to retrofit and improve the warmth and efficiency of their homes. However, I am going to refuse this application. It was quite complex at first for me to understand what was going on with all the different glazing, but I think that it's in a conservation area for a reason, and we have to be mindful of reflecting any further developments in these types of properties. And certainly the door was a big sticking point, definitely.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth.
I agree with my councillor colleagues. This is a conservation area, so I do feel for the applicants, but I think we should refuse this.
So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision here. Might want to consider polishing up some of the reasons for refusal, just minor changes, but it's a unanimous decision to refuse.
Yes, Commissioner, I'm looking at page 357, 358, which is the reasonable terms of refusal. Don't know if I kind of caught you there. Are there any like changes you're looking for?
I'm just thinking on policy 1B for placemaking has subsections, and I think C in refusal 1 and C after the 1B and then refusal 2. So it'd be policies 1A and 1B bracket C, and the second one policies 1A and 1B bracket C.
Yes, I think, Commissioner, I can see where you're going in the sense of the second paragraph of all three grounds of refusal refer to policies 1A and 1B, and you're suggesting that's changed to 1A and 1B C, subdivision C, and I'm assuming the other two members agree with that. Oh, yes. Okay. Right. Unanimous refusal on that basis.
So members, we now move on to number 4.5, which is the change of use of open space and the extension to a shop at 77 to 77 Balhousie Street in Perth. Mr. Burton, if you'd like to introduce this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs. So you can see the application site outlined in red. The shop is helpfully marked in the on Google Maps there, Premier Convenience Store. The application site is to the north of the shop area that's quite green, has trees in it, and you can see it's surrounded by two-storey houses with gardens. Next slide, please. So looking at the site from across the road, you can see the trees that are a good size. They're as high as the flats to the immediately adjacent, and there's a shrubbed area and an area where some bins are stored and a grassed area. Next slide, please. And looking at the shop from the other side, you can see the trees beyond the shop here. You can also see a site to the other side of the shop, which has consent for a separate hot food carryout, which would be attached to the building, but wouldn't be part of the same building. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the shop towards the area which is consent as a hot food shop. Next slide, please. And looking at the site in a lot more detail, you can see the grass and shrubs and trees are clearly maintained. Next slide, please. This is the site of the hot food shop. You can see from this that work has started on the site, which means that the site has planning permission extant. It means that the planning permission does not have a time limit in effect because work has started on the development. Next slide, please. And that's a close-up of that site. You can see foundations are in place for the for the new carryout, which has consent. Next slide, please. Looking at the site from end on, you can see the width of the the shrubbed area is roughly the same width as the shop. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for the use of an area of open space adjacent to a shop in Balhousie Street in Perth to accommodate an extension to the shop. The appeal site, which lies to the north of the shop, is currently in private ownership and is landscaped with 4 mature trees, shrubs and grass. The proposal is to extend the shop into the landscaped amenity area. 3 of the 4 trees would be removed, leaving a wild cherry tree to the side of the extension. The tree survey submitted with the application identifies the trees as being early mature and generally in good condition, although 1 tree is identified as being not suitable for retention, as is multi-stemmed with a congested, poorly configured crown. The applicant has planning permission granted in 2011 for an extension to the south of the shop, which is to be used as a separate hot food carryout. Work has started on this, as we've seen in the photos. To summarise the applicant's case, the application site is not owned by the council and is poorly maintained to the extent that it does not constitute quality amenity space and is not, contrary to the views of the case officer, pleasant. It is not identified in the local development plan as open space. The trees on site have been surveyed and have been found to fall into 2 categories. 2 trees are categorised as B, moderate quality, and 2 as C, low quality. One of the latter is proposed for removal as it's multi-stemmed and affected by the adjacent block of flats. To summarise the handling report, National Planning Framework 4, Policy 14, Design Quality and Place, seeks to ensure that all new developments have a good design standard and supports attractive, natural and built spaces. It states that proposals are poorly proposals that are poorly designed or detrimental to the area will not be supported. Local Development Plan Policy 14, Open Space Retention and Provision, seeks to protect open space of either recreation or amenity value. In this case, the proposal would result in the loss of open space of amenity value. Policy 17 of the Local Development Plan seeks to support new development that's compatible with existing uses, which can include local shops, although such development should be compatible with the amenity and character of the area and improve its character and environment. Policy 40B of the Local Development Plan includes a presumption in favour of protecting woodland resources. While it's accepted that the trees do require some management, this does not justify the removal and the significant reduction in the area of landscaped open space which results from this development. It's considered that the removal of 3 trees that are proposed and the loss of viable amenity space would conflict with the above policies, so the change of use is therefore considered to be unacceptable. 2 objections were received, although one relates solely to the hot food takeaway, which is not the subject of this application. The other objection cites parking issues and traffic and the loss of trees. Material considerations. Policy 14 of National Planning Framework 4 and policies 14, 17 and 40B of the Local Development Plan are relative. The traffic and parking issues raised by the objector are also material, but are considered to be acceptable by the case officer and transportation. Observations. The application site is privately owned and maintained, and the trees on site are not protected by a tree preservation officer order or any other statutory form of protection, although the land is classified as is incidental open space. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Stewart.
My impression of visiting the site, it's I describe quite a built-up area. Would that be in your impression, Sir Ross?
Yes, it would be. It's a fairly intensively developed area, largely housed with the gardens, although adjacent to the application site is a 3-storey block of flats. But that's unusual. Mostly it's 2-storey houses with gardens.
Thank you. No further questions, Chair.
And Councillor Illingworth.
I have no questions, Convener.
Mr. Burton, should we just clarify, is it designated as open space or is that just a...
It's not identified in the Local Development Plan as open space, but small areas of amenity open space such as this tend not to be. It tends to be larger areas which are identified as that. There are many areas of many smaller areas of open space which aren't specifically identified, such as this, and they are termed as amenity open space or incidental open space.
Perhaps another way of thinking about it, sorry to come in, is although it's not zoned as open space in the development plan, local development plan, as a matter of fact, it's open space and it's caught by the development plan policy. So it's not zoned as such. You won't see it coloured as that. It's just white land, but it is still caught by the LDP policy and NPF4 when it comes to open space, because as a matter of fact, it's open space.
As I understand, the existing extent permission is for the takeaway section. This would just be an extension of the shop, as I understand.
That's correct, Councillor. You can see on the overhead the extension for which has been granted for the hot food takeaway is on the other side of the building from the application site.
Fine, thank you. Got no further questions. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Stewart.
I'd like to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Illingworth, if you can kick off on this one.
Yeah. I'd like to accept the appeal. While I accept that there is a small loss of open space, that there will still be an open space, I'd like to put in a condition that another tree is put in to improve that public space. Thank you.
Councillor, I think on this occasion I'm in agreement with you. I know some of the objectors mentioned about takeaway, but the takeaway has already been approved, and obviously the extent permissions in place. I think on the basis that we want to see businesses expand, and the proposal is not to take all the open space, but only part of it. I think roughly half of it. So I think on this occasion, I'm happy to grant the appeal. But like you, I'd like to see a tree or trees replanted since the ones are going to be removed. So it's something to replace them. But as you said, there will be some open space left there, which I think is an important part. And looking at it, although it is reasonably tidy, it's not the best space in the world, I would be prepared to say. So happy to agree with you, Councillor, on this one to grant the appeal, subject to a condition for replacement trees. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. My opinion doesn't really matter. I was going to agree with the Perth and Kinross Council officers on, I think it was 5 grounds. I think, yes, I agree with you that business is important, expanding business and providing services that people need. However, I do feel in this location, any loss of green space and biodiversity would not outweigh the business expansion in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a majority decision on this one, 2-1 to grant the appeal, with a condition for replacement trees being put in.
Bear with me, Convener, I'll just write this down. What I have is by majority 2-1 is to grant the review and therefore grant planning permission subject to suitable terms and conditions and informatives. And I think one condition mentioned by you is, of course, that it's either landscaping or additional trees, certainly, in terms of the remaining open space. But I think, members, it is actually, strictly speaking, contrary to the development plan. But from what I heard you say, the justification would be it's an expansion of the business, and also it wouldn't be a significant loss of open space, as I understand what you both said.
That's correct. I think it also maintains the concept of a 20-minute neighbourhood as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the dissenting view, Councillor Stewart, is in line with the decision by the to retain the open space. Councillor, sorry, Mr. Burton wants to, if you maybe want clarification on conditions.
I was just going to make a suggestion to the committee that if you're minded to grant, you might want to include in the condition of on landscaping that a shelter is built for the bins. You saw in the pictures, the photographs there, that there were 3 quite large bins that were quite obvious there, and you could take the opportunity to make to get the applicant to provide a built-in shelter for them within the design of within the building or adjacent to the building, perhaps in timber.
I'm certainly happy with that, Councillor Lingworth.
I'm happy.
Yeah, we'll agree on that then. Right, members, we now move on to number 4.6 this morning, which is the siting of a holiday accommodation unit, formation of vehicular access and parking area, associated landscaping 30 metres southeast of Fairy Green Cottage, Kinross. Mr. Burton, if you would, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll take you through the pictures. You'll see the site is quite remote. Just to the right of that photograph, well, you can see the farm buildings. You can see there's a building adjacent to it, and you can see some farm buildings close by as well. It's surrounded by farmland, basically, a fair distance from a major road. Next slide, please. So that's looking at the site is on the left-hand side. You can see there's a tree within a planting protection timber construction there, that is the site on the left. So you're looking towards the farm buildings along the farm track, which would be the access to the building, to the new development. Next slide, please. And that's the site itself. It's flat and it's level. It's open fields to the rear, and the hedge and planting on one side. Next slide, please. And as you can see on the other side, a traditional single-storey stone cottage. Next slide, please. And that's looking past the stone cottage adjacent up the farm track towards the main road. Next slide, please. And looking at the site again, you can see it's you can see how it's level and it's got open farmland behind it. Next slide, please. And that's looking on the other side of the road. That's looking directly across from the application site. So you get an impression that it's surrounded by open farmland. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for the siting of a holiday rental cabin on land adjacent to a traditional cottage close to Fairy Green Farm, Kinrossy. The site is remote and an open countryside. The proposed cabin will be black stained timber with a black aluminium pitched roof, approximately 2.5 metres by 7. It'd have a bedroom, living room, kitchen, and a shower room and a porch. The proposals include a parking area for 2 cars and landscaping. The adjacent cottage has been used as a holiday let since May 2023 and is owned and managed by the applicant, who also owns Fairy Green Farm. To summarise the applicant's case, the proposal would expand the applicant's existing tourist business and would contribute to the viability, sustainability and diversity of the rural economy, supporting Scottish business by approximately £120,000. The cabin has been designed and scaled to be in keeping with the rural area and is in a sustainable location given the presence of a bus stop within walking distance. The applicant is also happy to promote sustainable travel, including the installation of EV charging, electrical vehicle charging points if required. The cabin would generate employment, 0.8 full-time equivalent, which would aid the viability of the adjacent holiday let. To summarise the handling report, National Planning Framework 4 Policy 29 Rural Development supports development proposals that contribute to and support the local rural economy, subject to criteria. Of these criteria, diversification of existing businesses is the most relevant. The proposal seeks to diversify the tourist offering of the Dunsinane estate. That policy requires developments in rural areas to be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the area's character and should take account of transport needs. In this respect, the closest bus stop to the site is Socher, 1.65 kilometres away. Local Development Plan 2, Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification is also relevant. This states a preference that developments will generally be within or adjacent to existing settlements, although sites out with settlements could be acceptable where they diversify an existing business or are related to an existing site-specific resource or opportunity. It requires proposals for new tourism-related developments to be justified through a business plan. The site is out with the settlement boundary, but located adjacent to an existing farmyard and cottage. The supporting documents include a section titled Business Plan, but the 9 bullet points it contains lack the detail expected of a business plan. Further information submitted within a policy analysis document has made the case for the proposal be considered as an extension of a tourism business, since the adjacent cottage has been offered as a short-term let, and that such an expansion would allow larger guest groups to be accommodated. Passing mention has also been made of the wider Dunsinane estate's sport offering in terms of shooting, fishing and mountain biking, but the attraction of Ballow Woods, cited by the applicants as the closest attraction, is over 6 kilometres away. Other local attractions mentioned are further away. The policy also states that the proposal should not encourage unsustainable travel patterns, and it's considered that guests would be predominantly car dependent due to the chalet's remote location from public transport infrastructure and the core path network. As such, the proposal is poorly located to encourage sustainable travel for guests. It is considered, therefore, not to meet the requirements of National Planning Framework or the Local Development Plan. There were no representations to the proposal. Material considerations, Policy 29 of National Planning Framework 4 and Policy 8 of the Local Development Plan are both relevant. Observations: the fact that the planning permission was not required or sought for the use of the adjacent cottage for holiday rentals means that it is not considered to constitute a tourism-related business on its own. If the applicants were to provide a business plan, as required by the local development plan, that aspect could be properly taken into account. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Goes to questions. Councillor Stewart.
When I did a site visit, Mr. Ross, my impression was this wasn't being used for agricultural purposes.
No, I would agree. That was my impression as well, Councillor, when I visited.
There's much was cited about transport and sustainable transport, and the applicant has said they're going to make provision for EV chargers. That is a U-class road that the site goes onto. Do you think there'd be any? We see in the diagrams 2 cars at the property. Do you think that'd be any significant increase in rural single track roads?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what your question was there, Councillor.
Sorry, yes, I was mixing up 2 or 3 points. The applicant is going to have EV chargers. My thoughts were about a rural single track road that this farm track goes onto. Would you think this type of application have a significant impact in road infrastructure?
I wouldn't have thought so in that respect, Councillor. The infrastructure required for putting in an electric vehicle charger is electrical, to be honest. So the power is there already. I'm not sure if that answers your question entirely, but I think that's as much as I can say on it, I think.
Sorry, Mr. Ross, that's my poor asking of questions, but now I've said something out loud, it's clarified something in my own head. Thank you. Counselling session. No further questions, Chair.
Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you. Are there any concerns about the business plan that's associated with this application?
The part of the applicant's submission entitled business plan isn't a business plan. It doesn't have any information, for instance, on the employment side of things. It does mean the fact that there's a 0.8 full-time equivalent job associated with the proposal is mentioned elsewhere in the document, but it's not justified or backed up in any way. I would expect a business plan to have more in terms of the finance and how much would be expected to be generated by the business locally, as well as to the applicant, and I would expect it to show how siting it adjacent to a cottage, which is also offered for holiday let, would aid the business proposition, as it were.
Thank you.
I think the questions have been asked already, which I would have thought of. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
Have sufficient information, like to proceed.
Councillor Illingworth.
I'd like to defer and ask the applicants to come up with a more full business plan.
I have to agree with you, Councillor Illingworth. I would like to defer for a business plan, a formal business plan. Went to see the site. Obviously, no implication of a decision on this, but I would have to say I'm interested enough to get a full business plan put together on this. I think give us some appropriate ideas. So I'm not sure how you feel about that, Councillor Stewart, but I'll put it back to you for a second anyway.
Thank you, Chair, for asking my opinion. Yes, I think on reflection, Councillor Illingworth's proposal is sound.
So, Ms. Ray, we've got a deferment for a formal business plan on this with all the relevant information that we'd expect. As I said, it's not the implication that we've approved or intend to approve. It's just, I think we have the interest there to see further information on this.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think what I've got is defer the application for, defer the review for the applicant to produce a comprehensive business plan for the proposal, and then to allow development management to comment on that, and then to bring it back at the next available LRB. Okay.
Okay, over to you. Thank you. So members, that now leads us on to the last application today. This is number 5.1. This is an application that's coming back to us. We require a deferment, which we required information. Councillor Lingworth, you weren't on the panel for that one. Councillor Stewart was with me. So I'll pass over to Mr. Burton to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this is one that's returning to the committee. What I'll do is run through my original report, and at the end of the report, I will add an addendum which updates on the new information that's been submitted. So if we could go through the pictures first, the site there is outlined in red. You see it's quite a large site at the end of a row of houses in the countryside, and you can see there's a fairly sizable industrial unit just on the other side of the road, north of the A90. Next slide, please. So that's the application site access as proposed, and you can see just beyond it the ridge of the nearest house. Along that single track road that you can see in front, there's a number of houses on the left hand side of that road stretching northwards. Next slide, please. And looking back down the road, again past the access, which you can see it curves away on the left hand side of the road, just about where the bushes are. You can see the start of the access to the industrial unit. Next slide, please. And looking into the site itself, on the right hand side of the picture here is the hedge which marks the boundary of the adjacent house, and you can see the extent of the site. It ends with the planting on the far side of the picture. Next slide, please. And looking back on the access road from just within the site, you can see the road is curving at that point. Next slide, please. And on the site itself, you can see it's quite extensive. It's well, it has a defined boundary of a sizable hedge all the way around it. Next slide, please. And this is pretty much the centre of the site, looking towards the western boundary. Next slide, please. And looking back towards the entrance. And next slide, please. And looking towards the house, the closest house to the north. Next slide, please. And looking back down the full extent of the site from the approximate position of one of the houses as shown in the application. Next slide, please. So planning permission as principle is sought for the erection of two houses on an open field to the south of a line of houses to the north of the A90. Well, the applications for permission in principle, an indicative layout shows two houses on the northern part of the field, served by a shared driveway using the existing field access with extensive gardens extending south. The application also specifically states two houses in the title, so if this application is granted by the committee, that is the maximum number of houses that could be built. To summarise the applicant's case, the application site is adjacent to a line of houses to the north, so the proposal in extending that building group would comply with Policy 19, Housing and Countryside of the Local Development Plan. The report of handling confirms that the application site is immediately to the south of an established building group, and that the site is well defined by existing landscape features and topography. This meets the requirements of the supplementary guidance supporting Policy 19. The house plots shown on the indicative plan are similar to the plot sizes of the houses in the existing group. The application site has no current use, and given its size and location, has no prospect of being used for agriculture. Discussions with the Council's road service has confirmed that the proposed access to the site could be made acceptable, and the relevant calculations are included in the appeal papers. To summarise the handling report, Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan is relevant. The most relevant category is building groups. The application site is not considered to accord with the requirements for this category, as the site is significantly larger than the plots within the adjacent grouping to the north, and due to the position of the embankment and the sloping topography along the east and south boundaries, it would not be possible to front any development onto the road, which is characteristic of the building group to the north. Policy requires new development to respect the established character and building pattern of the adjacent grouping, and this proposal is not considered to achieve this. The indicative layout which has been submitted only serves to demonstrate that development on this site would fail to respect the established character of the grouping, which generally sees dwellings fronting eastward onto the public road. The proposed vehicle access to the public road network would be via an existing farm track, which would be upgraded as part of the development. The access is at the end of a blind curve from the A90 junction, making visibility poor. The submission has advised that works will be carried out to improve the visibility display, but it would appear that these works are out with the red line planning application boundary. Given that the principle of development is considered to be contrary to policy, further information on visibility displays has not been requested, and the proposal is considered to be contrary to policy 60B, as it has not been demonstrated that a safe access and egress to the site can be provided. If permission were granted for the development, a developer contribution for Longforgan Primary School would be required. So there are no representations for the application. Material considerations. Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan, Housing and the Countryside is relevant, as is Policy 60B, Transport Standards and Accessibility. Policy 17 of NPF 4, New Homes in Rural Areas, is also relevant. This supports proposals for new housing development in rural areas, which are on a site allocated for housing within a local development plan, reuses brownfield land, reuses a redundant or an unused building, is an appropriate use of a historic environment asset, and is demonstrated to be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business. Addendum to the above. The application was considered by the committee, the local review body, on the 3rd of July. It has continued to allow transport planning to comment on the proposed access visibility display and for the applicant to have the opportunity to respond. I draw your attention to pages 695 to 698, which you have before you. You'll see that transport planning accepts that an appropriate display can be achieved on land owned by the applicant. You will see also that as information of the visibility display will require the relocation of the boundary fence and removal of hedging along with appropriate earthworks, transport planning would wish to see it provided prior to the commencement of any development, which is granted. If the committee decides to grant planning permission for the development, a suitable condition would need to be attached to ensure this work is carried out before the rest of the development begins. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I've no questions. I'm familiar with the last application and the papers submitted today. Thank you.
Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. Does the presence of a very large industrial site just directly across the road, and also the aerials for phone networks across the road, make this part of the building group anyway?
Whether the building is part of the building group would depend on the view taken for the existing building group. Now, a building group is generally a group of houses. It wouldn't relate to the industrial building, which is, as you can see in the aerial picture there on the screen, quite separate from the building group of houses. So if committee were to take the view that this is genuinely part of a building group, the only building group that would be relevant would be the houses immediately to the north. The telegraph or electricity poles in the field do not constitute any part of a building group.
Thank you.
Thank you. One question, Mr. Burton. I seem to recall when I did a visit last time, just going further away, but northbound on that track on the road as we're looking at it, there was another house which is perpendicular to the road. So this style would not be unique, I think. I seem to remember there's about 3 or 4 houses up.
No, I remember that as well, councillor. I drove up the road and one of the houses was gable onto the road. In this particular case, what the case officer is referring to is not just one house being gable on, but 2 houses being in a row from the road.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have no further questions. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
I would like to proceed.
And Councillor Ingworth.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed, so I'll start with this one. This came up several months ago, and I did do a visit to the site. The visibility displays, I would think, was a concern. As we've noted, that was deferred for that to be looked into. That report has come back, and our transport officers have made it clear they're happy with that, subject to 2 conditions going on if we approve. As I've mentioned, although it's 2 houses, as Mr. Burton says, perpendicular to the road, is not unique in the area. There is another house further up which does face gable on. The plots are larger, slightly larger, and that's another point to make. But given that the displays are now perfect, I am happy to give this an approval of the appeal. The reason for refusal number 2 is now no longer applies anyway. And my thoughts are that this can be carefully constructed within the site. The plots will be slightly longer and larger in some ways, but I feel that it will be an added benefit to the group itself. So I'm happy to grant the appeal on this case, subject to the conditions as required by our transport officers. So Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to grant this. I'm satisfied with the application coming back before us, and I'm happy to grant accordance with our local development plan too.
And Councillor Ingworth.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow councillors to grant this appeal for the reasons they mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision here, subject to the 2 conditions from transport officers. I think there needs to be a condition on the education side as well, which I didn't mention.
Yes, Convener, it isn't in principle, so the developer contributions would be going as conditions initially, but I think unanimously what you've decided to do, excuse me, bring the microphone here to me, is to grant subject suitable terms, conditions and informatives. That includes conditions you would refer to, both the kind of transport planning side of things as well as the developer contributions. My understanding is that you, having obtained the additional information, you're now of the view that it accords with the development plan. Okay, could you just turn to Mr. Burton, see whether there's any comments on conditions.
On the condition to be added, and none at all. No.
I think that's us then. Well, members, that's the last paper for today, and the last paper for the LRB this year. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's the last one before Christmas and the New Year. So if I may, I'd like to take the opportunity of wishing everybody here a very happy Christmas and a very happy New Year. Thank you, Councillor Ingworth and Councillor Stewart, for being on the panel again today. Mr. Burton, thank you very much for your work, and particularly this year. And I'm sure you've enjoyed driving around Perth and Kinross. Mr. Elliott, my thanks to you, and of course Mr. Fogg as well when he's here, for all your input and invaluable input, and my thanks to Jess for all her work, particularly this time, I think, because we've had a very, very busy planning meeting last week, a lot of paperwork put together, and equally a lot of paperwork put together today. So my special thanks to you for managing to get it all together for us. So thank you all, happy Christmas, and until next time, see you on the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener.